Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi. This episode is focused on how to work effectively now. We are having to adjust to highly digitalized modern business environments, which have new rules of engagement. The stakes have risen significantly and continue to rise. How are leaders at your company enabling and managing employees to adapt to these challenges and opportunities as we face and absorb their meaning and adjust to accommodate their effects and stay competitive? Improving speed and productivity won't be enough. We need new mindsets and methods. We need to think differently and bring new perspectives and approaches ready for today's challenges and the next evolutions. We need to integrate flexibility and adaptability into our operations and work practices, which is what hybrid and remote working models are, one dimension of our necessary strategic, evidence-based, logical, and flexible response to accommodate the changing business landscape. So what does this mean? How do we need to work? What new mindsets and approaches will be effective? And how can we ensure new practices take hold? I'm delighted to be speaking again to one of the veterans of remote working, Kate Lister, President of Global Workplace Analytics. In part one, the previous episode, Kate gave us the trends and realities of remote working over nearly 2 decades. In this part two, we get granular about modern work, including updating management, oversight, innovation, soft skills meetings, and metrics. In her work, Kate provides reason, rationale, and logic to help employers understand the benefits of remote working options, while also assisting them develop and measure the effectiveness of strategic remote and hybrid workplace deployments. Hi, Kate. How are you? It's good to be back for part two.
Yes, thank you. Great to see you again.
So this time, we're not going to go back to the beginning because we've been on the journey. We've got through how you got to this point, the journey of telecommuting, got through the pandemic. If anybody hasn't listened to part one, please do, because that really sets us up for where we are now and really thinking about how we can be effective when we're remote working, hybrid working, fully remote, hybrid teams, all those type of things, all very different, which makes it interesting and challenging. Kate, I'd love to actually start with how you made the business case, you made the use cases and convinced CEOs and CFOs and CHROs a good number of years ago about telework. How are you helping their employees be effective with very different tools, with very different general attitudes towards it? Some of them haven't changed, but we have a lot more acceptance and understanding, but particularly on the tools and processes. These are so important when it comes to being effective in this new hybrid and evolved working environment.
Yeah, I said in the last session that typically we would spend 6 months to a year helping a client get ready for this. But because they've been in triage mode, nobody's really put the practices and processes in place to really support hybrid. Mm-hmm. Or to really support remote. I mean, we've adopted cloud-based storage and
right.
Cloud-based software. We've boosted security. We've done those things, but the real nitty-gritty. What do you do every day, and how do you do it? We didn't do that, and I feel like in some ways it's like when we got cell phones, we only used them at the house, or when we got smartphones, we only used them to make phone calls. I feel like that's what we're doing, and it leaves a lot on the table,
right? And
B, I think it exposes the practice of remote work to criticism that because things aren't working that well because they never took the time to make them work well. So as an example, hybrid meetings, they can be horrible.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a story that we spent 6 months with a company readying them for continuing remote work.
And when was this?
This would have been late 2021. So they'd already decided that they were going to allow flexibility. They were thinking about how many people wanted to work from home. We had interviewed the leaders and understood who supported it, who didn't. And, where we needed to work on things. We did focus groups with employees. We did surveys to see, what was the work they actually did, what did they want, what was working, what wasn't working, what did they need to do better, and all that kind of thing. How to hold hybrid meetings, how to work asynchronously, how to be equitable in decisions around who gets the best projects and raises and compensation and promotions. And so we're sitting in the boardroom, they're sitting in the boardroom, and I was virtual. So the whole board is there, and we're presenting the end of the gig, the end of our engagement, and what we learned. And at the end of that session, I said, okay, I think we should rate this meeting, and I think you should rate all your meetings. How did it go? And I said, I'm going to go first. I give this meeting a 3 on a 10 scale. And here's why. You're all on a long table with a microphone overhead. I could barely hear what you were saying. You have one screen in the room, and so people can either see me or my presentation. And so you're not getting any feedback from me, visual feedback. You're not. I wasn't getting it from you. The sound was muddy. I certainly couldn't tell who was speaking.
Right.
I was getting no visuals of what people were thinking in the room. At one point, somebody asked a question and I had an answer to it, but I couldn't break into the conversation.
Right.
I wound up texting the chairman and saying, hey, I can't seem to break into the conversation. And he brought in my point. And then at one point you stopped for a coffee break and you shut off the video and the audio.
Right.
So I'm just stuck here on my own with no donuts. And one of them said, wait a minute, didn't we just have a consulting firm come in here and help us work through all these things? And I said, exactly. But it's not easy. It's something that's going to take a lot of practice, and you're going to have to keep each other honest on it. Owl Labs is one of my clients. They have a little microphone that sits in the middle of the table. It's also a video, and it swivels so that it can see people's face. Zoom now has some features that do that too, with Zoom Room. So that's starting to get better. But it's I think all of those things, like using chat, using polls for people, people that didn't really have a voice in the room before, now have other opportunities that we should continue with. Using asynchronous documents. So we're talking about this document, and we're going to put it out there on Google Docs so you can continue to work with it.
Right.
I happen to be an introvert, and introverts think more slowly than extroverts.
They do? Okay.
Extroverts are happy to just blurt things out. They're the people they're the
That doesn't necessarily mean they think faster.
Exactly.
They just talk faster.
They're blurters. And introverts tend to go back and think about it before they feel comfortable saying something. Women can't break into the conversation as easily as men. All of those things. But now we have this whole suite of communication tools that allow us to be better. I recommend having a buddy in the room so that if you can't break in, there's somebody there that can pull you in. There is new technology coming that can say, hey, you haven't called on many women in the room. Or did you know that, in fact, I have this on my screen. Did you know that you've spoken for 80% of the time during this call?
Right. Right.
And if it's one person talking, then it shouldn't be a meeting at all.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other thing. And that's, another one of those practices and processes is deciding on what needs to be a meeting at all, because everybody knows that they're a huge waste of time.
Let's talk about the how of work. Overall, it seems that things were set up for the factories, for the machines, for production. And now we're getting much more sophisticated. We created all these amazing sophisticated tools, and we should actually work out how to use them and how to work. Looking at how, or new system in terms of how a company should be addressing or meeting the opportunities and challenges of really putting whatever model it is in place that they have agreed on. How do you approach that? How do you help them work out all these different things? There's so many more layers and intricacies and nuances because we're thinking about people individually and what their needs are.
Yeah. I mean, I think historically managers are promoted from some position where they did well, but that doesn't mean that they were good managers.
Right.
And even the managers that were good managers prior to the pandemic found that managing remote employees is different, and they needed to be more of a coach than a manager. Sadly, some companies have gone to virtual babysitting with surveillance and tracking.
Oh, don't get me started on
your
that
eyes
one.
rolling back in your head.
Yeah, you probably lost my eyes there. And it's getting much worse.
It is. I mean, it's something like I just read the other day, 78% of companies say they use some form of surveillance. And here in the US, it's just a wild west. You don't even have to tell people. California just changed the law, but you don't even have to tell your people they're being watched. And the whole concept of being watched, I just think of animals in cages and the stress levels that they feel. My daughter-in-law worked for a company that she's a registered nurse. She's been a registered nurse for over 20 years and was doing processing healthcare claims. So she got to decide basically whether or not you needed that gallbladder removed.
Wow.
And great job. She's got 3 kids, 4 dogs, 3 rabbits. She's got a busy life.
Sure.
And by working from home, it allowed her to really be able to manage things better.
Right.
About a year afterwards, the company came and said, well, we're changing the rules. You don't have like these number of cases a day and then you're done. Your fingers have to be moving on the keyboard all but 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon, and 30 minutes for break.
I'm sorry, what? They don't get an hour lunchtime? I mean, what?
Half hour.
Half hour?
Half hour. This is a responsible nurse. And wait a minute, do you really want somebody to have to be very, very speedy in making the decision about that gallbladder of yours?
Oh my
don't you want them
goodness,
to think?
Right. I'm absolutely blown away that they think that not even one whole hour of break in an entire workday is sufficient when there was endless research to say we need time, we need breaks.
But the tracking, and then the other organizations are taking screenshots of my face and watching where I go on the web and blocking some parts of the web, and it's just total nonsense. It's virtual babysitting because they haven't learned how to manage by results. And so that's, a very long answer to your question. What do? When a manager comes to you and says, I'm worried about productivity, you ask why, how are you measuring it? Right. How did you measure it before? How are you measuring it now? I mean, there's 4 things right now that I'm hearing. It's ruining our culture. Innovation is going to be held up. Engagement is going to go down, and productivity is going to go down. All 4 of those things have been proven in research to be wrong. Right. And so when I go into a company and they tell me, I'm worried about the decline in our culture, how do you know your culture has declined? Because in fact, employees feel that their culture has gotten better during the pandemic.
Right.
Something like 75% of employees think it's gotten better, and about 40% of managers think it's gotten better.
There's been some very visible Wall Street folks who talked about the fact that working from home doesn't suit their culture. Whether it goes up or goes down, I do think that culture needs to be strong and connective when people are working in a distributed manner. I'd love for you to explain a bit about culture and how you help companies when they're now preparing for that transition. How do you focus on culture and how do you help them develop that? Because there is such a huge response or reaction or resistance to hybrid models or remote working because of the need to be dealing with culture differently?
Yeah. Obviously, first I show them the facts, and, come to some agreement on how we're going to measure that. But then it has to be very intentional, and that's true of so many things. It's not that as much as that it's harder, but it has to be intentional. You've got to. I talked to the head of workplace at GitLab, Darren Murph. Everybody knows him.
Yeah.
And how do you do it? He said, every single meeting we have, we start out with, what are the company's values? What is this that we're talking about? How does that tie to our company's values?
Right.
How do you feel about that? Right now I'm looking at you and there's a blank wall behind you. If we were in an office, there'd be some, wonderful pictures of all of the great things that this company has done for the world. And there'd be a timeline along our 100 years and all of that.
Right.
We need to, I don't think we've come really far enough with technology to replicate that.
Yeah.
In this. But let's also say that culture is about people. And we were using an office as kind of a proxy for culture when it wasn't. And Gartner did some research last year that showed that culture was already on the decline prior to the pandemic. And in so many ways, the pandemic didn't create management problems, didn't create organizational problems. It revealed them. Right. And that's something that I'm taking from a line that Martha Johnson from the US GSA said probably 10 years ago when they were first looking at some telework programs. She said, telework doesn't create management problems, it reveals them. But look at all the things it revealed. Right. It revealed that we didn't have good security, that we didn't have good communications, that we didn't have high levels of trust. Very, very important to culture. That we weren't putting out our values. When you ask somebody, what does this company stand for? They don't know.
What I realized is that in the past, when people had job security, certainly in the US, I mean, there is more job security elsewhere, but in the US, when you had job security in the 50s and 60s, you could trust the organization. You didn't have to trust your boss because you had a job. And if you then shift that, if you have no job security whatsoever, the trust has to come from the person. And so it puts a new level of demand, not just about mental health and that kind of support, but it is the leader, the manager, the team leader that needs to create that trust. And that goes to the challenge of when you put the surveillance in place, because the surveillance comes from a lack of trust, and you're never going to get any trust if you have that in place.
Yeah. And, a layoff, we're seeing a lot of layoffs now. The trust goes out the window.
Right.
It sort of depends on how you do it. When Capital One came out with their announcement, and I think this was late in 2021 about what they were going to do, they were going to allow people to work from home 1 or 2 days a week, I think it was. But the announcement went all through, these are the things that we thought about, and these are the reasons that we're doing this. And this is not a final decision. This is how we think we need to go forward right now. Okay. And we may decide to change that further on. Okay, fine. I'm down with that. Right. Versus, I want to see your faces here on Monday morning or you're fired.
I'm curious as to some of the ways to measure trust, because that's actually very hard. So much of it is qualitative or indirect. So how do you help companies get specific about trying to deal with that fundamental core issue?
Yeah, I have a colleague in the UK, Dr. Craig Knight, and he's got a fascinating video and talks about surveys, employee surveys. And at some point says something like, you get more value out them by rolling them up and using them to line your bird cage or something like that. And his point was that most questions, most survey design is very, very poor. So you don't ask someone, do you trust your manager? Right. You've got to feel around the edges of, what does that mean? What would a trusting relationship look like? Yep. Would you recommend your manager to someone else? So the Net Promoter Score. Right. If you had to call on someone to help you in your office. If he's listening, he'll probably shoot me because I'm not saying this right. But I mean, take the time, and if you're going to do that kind of survey,
Right.
get it right. Same thing with culture. There's also a number of products specifically aimed at culture. I'm waving my hands. 4 parts. Cameron Quinn.
Okay.
Culture tool. There's lots and lots and lots of culture tools.
Now, culture and trust take more time. What are some of the systems and thinking about how to put in place the ways of working that are going to allow people to work effectively in an organization?
I think the biggest ones are team understandings, team norms, communication norms, meeting norms, policies that are written, hopefully where the decisions happen down at the team level. And then at the team level, it's things like, are we prompt for meetings?
Okay.
There's a zero lateness policy, or that's how we're going to be, right?
Right.
Okay, if we all agree to that, that's fine. Versus we're going to spend the first 5 minutes of every meeting just talking and catching up, so that you don't have to feel like that's a bad thing.
Right.
What technology are we going to use when we meet? What can you wear on a call? Mm-hmm. Can you eat on a team call?
Right.
When do we have them? Let's say we've got colleagues that are in another time zone. Maybe we should shift that around so that they're not the ones that always have to stay up late.
Right.
How are we going to trust each other?
That's a good question.
How are we going to work together? And communication norms, when are you going to use chat? When are you going to use email? When are you going to use asynchronous documents? Everybody likes to communicate in a different way. I've got colleagues that they'll just message me. They would never think of picking up the phone.
Right.
And I'm shocked actually when somebody just picks up the phone and calls me sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm not in a bad way. It's just like, well, that's novel. But there's sometimes it's just an absolute waste of time to go back and forth on an email.
Oh yeah. A lot of those things are very different in terms of the fact that you're thinking about and taking into account many different people's preferences within a team. And managers aren't necessarily used to that at all. How do you encourage managers and people up the chain to embrace individual preferences? Obviously, nobody gets exactly what they want. Everybody has to compromise. To bring all that together to be able to maximize and optimize the performance and outcomes.
They have to agree to try it.
Okay.
And once they have, I've always found that it actually relaxes things a lot.
Okay.
This is how we're going to handle conflict. People feel like they are being heard more. Again, this is all down at the team level. Mm-hmm. And it's just like any habit. You've got to continue to do it for a period of time and call one another on it, right? I mean,
right.
We're not going to get it right, but be open enough with one another, have enough trust in one another that we can talk about those things. Right. I know your next book is about empathy.
Yes, it is.
And I think that's another huge part of success in working together. If I get an email from you that's short and sweet and feels a little stiff.
Right.
I pick up the phone. I don't think, well, boy, she's nasty. I pick up the phone and I say, or whatever I do, and I say, hey, are you okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think that in fact, the pandemic, maybe a silver lining is that we did get to see that people have lives.
Yeah.
They're not just this single dimensional person that comes to work and has no financial worries or has no family worries or, whatever it might be. It's that whole person. And the funny thing is, it's like, is there anybody that doubts that if somebody is happy and feeling good, they're going to perform better? I mean, is there anybody that doubts that? And yet, what do we do to help them with that?
I think this is one of the challenges now when people are so busy. There are so many things changing. Everything is uncertain, unpredictable. And I have to think about that too. I have to make you happy. I think it's one more thing that I didn't want to have to think about, which is unfortunate because, of course, the combined positive compounding response that you get is so worth it on every level that it's frustrating when that doesn't happen. For managers tasked with all these things, they're working on the culture, they're trying to articulate the values and set the example. They're not doing it all the time, but they're getting there. What are some of the things that you can practically give managers advice all the way up the company in terms of how can they try and reframe it for themselves, try and get into that mindset that's going to help them get over the hump, I guess, because setting a hybrid model is not easy.
It's not easy. And, I don't think we're there with the technology. I think there's still a long way to go in terms of knowing when to go into the office and being able to find people that doesn't cross over into the creepy surveillance kinds of things.
Right.
There's a lot of questions to be answered there, but middle managers are really stuck because they've got senior leadership in a lot of cases that want people back in. They understand that their people don't want to be, and they've got to toe the party line.
Right.
And
right.
It in terms of their employees trusting them and creating those trust bonds, it makes them look untrustworthy if they're, thinking one thing and doing another.
For sure.
But that's not the question that you asked. You asked, how do you help them?
And when you're answering that, the one thing that I definitely want to ask, which I mentioned offline, was this whole thing about creativity. We've heard about the serendipity and the water cooler, and that's why you have to be in the office. So as you're helping the manager, how do you help them get over that particular one as well and address it for their higher ups?
Well, I think you know how I'm going to answer that.
I do.
With facts. Show me how innovation has reduced innovation, because innovation is a two-part process. It involves creativity and it involves vetting. So, you don't pursue every idea you have, thank God. And the creativity happens best when you're alone, when you're in the shower. When you're in the car, when you're walking the dog. Right. That's where we come up with our most creative ideas. There is the single innovator, to be sure, but in a lot of cases, those ideas are best vetted in a group. But the research shows that people who are brainstorming in a group face-to-face feel more productive, but they're not. They're coming up with fewer. They come up with more ideas, but fewer commercially viable ideas.
Really? Oh, fascinating.
I'll send you the study.
Yes, please do.
Global patents went up during the 2 years of the pandemic. How are you going to measure innovation? I would say you want to measure trust. You want to measure interactions with people that we don't know very well, people that are different from us. One of the things that we did clearly see during the pandemic is that weak ties, the people that are outside of your network, but you kind of connected with sometimes, got weaker, and strong ties, those ties with your team, got stronger. Those weak ties are fundamental to innovation. It's being able to get those cross-functional collaborations and cross-cultural and all of that. In some ways, the being able to hire from anywhere is great because it gives us a leg up on that cross-cultural.
Because you're learning more how to bridge those gaps.
Yep.
Okay.
And also the dynamics that we talked about in meetings.
Right.
You're getting probably an extra 50% of thought pool that you weren't getting before if you allow people to participate in the way that they can participate best. The neurodiverse, autodiverse, that's somebody who doesn't like to drive cars, are now getting a voice in the room, and we have to be accommodating to allow them to have that say.
And if you're going to help managers be trained? What are some of the priority things that managers should best focus on? What are the kind of things that they should be prioritizing to help them be better managers? Is it about leadership? Is it decentralized leadership? Is it more about empowering, or the coaching element to it? What are the key things that help?
Yeah. Well, micromanagement doesn't help. That's been proven. And yet we still have a lot of micromanagers, knowing that they are, understanding that they are,
Right.
And showing them a different way to do it. I mean, ideally, there ought to be these goals of the organization, right? And they cascade down to the senior leadership, and then the senior leadership that get divvied up and they get cash in the middle. And then so that the last person, feels like they're a part of they know how they're contributing to the organization. Yeah. And I love the story of Jack Kennedy, who walks into a building and asks a guy with a broom, "So what do you do here?" And he says, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon."
Love that. Yeah.
Right. It's having that kind of connection and that sense of purpose. We're hearing that word a lot more now, but again, Maslow nailed this in the 1950s.
He certainly did.
We just have to pay attention.
I think there are two other big challenges with younger people. One is to do with onboarding, how to do that, some of the principles that you've seen have been most effective. And together with that is the other piece of it, which is new people in an organization, particularly younger people who are relatively new in the labor market. They don't know how to work. It's not a pejorative sense at all, because if you don't have 2 years to watch somebody doing something and very slowly work out what is an effective way to do it and what isn't, without micromanaging, giving people the building blocks or the different strategies that they can use, how do you see companies really succeeding in those different areas?
Yeah, I mean, those are concerns that we're hearing all the time. I can throw some research at it and show that it can be good either way, and in fact is probably best both ways. So in person and virtual. Virtual might allow me to have a junior colleague on a call with, I'm in France and they're here, and have them exposed to that call and just listen. The technology is coming along where every meeting will be videoed, transcribed, and organized in a way that, hey, I need to know something about how to type it in. Right. Here's the clip of your CEO talking about it. I also have to, everybody says we need to replicate the water cooler. Who said the water cooler was a good thing to begin with, right? I never heard of any brilliant ideas coming out of that water cooler. And the same thing is true of onboarding. 50% of people quit in the first 6 months.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Oh, my goodness. So,
this is before the pandemic. So
right.
How was that onboarding going before? I don't think that's one of those things that we want to replicate. And this is about those practices and processes. We don't just want to, get a cell phone and use it at home. We need to learn to use the tools, and we need to engage with that population differently. Right. We also need to recognize in the younger population that they have smaller homes. For sure. They live in apartments. Sometimes they live with somebody else. It's harder for them. So maybe we need to think about co-working places and putting them in the mix. Right. Making intentional is going to come up again here. Being intentional about how you mentor rather than just waiting for, it to click after they've heard the same thing over and over and over again. Let's say you're training a salesperson. Have 100 sales calls for them to listen to. Right. Think of new ways to do this. But training is just going to be such an important thing going forward. And you asked what managers can do. It's teaching them to be coaches, teaching them to give people the help them understand their goals, give them the resources they need to meet those goals. So that means the equipment and access to people and skills and everything else that it takes to make them successful, and then get all the crap that's standing in their way out of the way. And that's things like meetings. And we were talking to one company during the pandemic, and it just happened to come up that there's a 15-minute wait on the elevator every day. Well, that's something that we really ought to look at. If we're worried about productivity, that's 30 minutes somebody's spending going,
my gosh,
between the floors.
Right.
I call it the sludge of work, bullying, discrimination,
right.
Fear, how the desks are arranged so that, I'm not looking behind me and feeling uncomfortable, having places for privacy, knowing what's expected of me, having kind of a one source of truth versus learning it from the water cooler.
So many things that we need to be working on. And as you said, I think there was so much about work that wasn't visible, that we weren't paying attention to. We were making it up as we went along. And I think now we simply can't do that. Unfortunately, so many things are changing at the same time that it isn't an easy time to be working all of this stuff out.
Yeah, change fatigue is real. But it's the future. And we need to learn to be agile and adaptive.
Yes, more so even than 6 or 9 months ago now with ChatGPT, and the ongoing evolution of technology in our jobs and how those are going to be changing is not going to slow down anytime soon. One last question. If somebody's trying to change the dynamics and trying to get to a better model, how do you advise them? What are the things that they can do? If they'd like to stay at the company, but this model isn't working, we need to have something which has more flexibility in it, or more days that I can be working from home because that's really meaningful to me. And I'd really like to stay here if possible.
I guess it's giving management the why. It's why, the why and the WIFM. What's in it for me? That's what that's the question everybody has to answer. And when management is telling you something that maybe you don't agree with, maybe it's because you don't understand what's behind it.
Okay.
And so, being transparent and letting people into those conversations that help them understand all that goes into it. I'm on a HOA board. Big groan. And, we found sometimes bringing the people that are the loudest complainers onto the board changes them, because, they realize just how much has to go into whatever decisions we make. And we're not just making these decisions willy-nilly.
Right.
And there is time where if your personal values don't match the company, that it's better for them and better for you if you leave.
Right. Agreed. So this part 2, jam-packed with so much information. What haven't I asked you that I should have asked you?
Sustainability.
Oh, yes. Okay.
I was one of the people who said for years and years and years that remote work would offer us the opportunity to get cars off the road, reduce traffic accidents, reduce vehicle miles traveled. It didn't happen. By 2021, we were back up to the same level of vehicle miles. Now we're past that of 2019. Car accidents went up. And it's what others have said all along. It's induced travel. You'll get on the highway and go downtown as long as it's not too painful. And so once the road's cleared up, it's like, oh, well, yeah, I could go downtown now. And that builds up to another level where it's intolerable. We've sort of shied away from public transportation as the result of people moving out of cities and companies moving out of cities, transportation dollars. The dollars that go to support those activities that help to cut down on greenhouse gases are going by the wayside. We need to rethink a lot of these things, including how we drive. So one of the things that helps when you go to the office is that you tend to trip chain. So you do this before you go on your way there, and you do this on your way home. And during the pandemic, we made onesie-twosie trips. And car starts and stops are very polluting. Congestion went down, which is good because that's very polluting. And it's also one of those things, it's hard to say that we certainly didn't have a good experience, a stable experience. we couldn't get on airplanes, so maybe we got in cars.
Right.
I don't know. That needs to work itself out. But it's certain that there's some behavioral aspect, and that if companies want to claim that they're reducing greenhouse gases through remote work, then they need to start, guess what? Measuring it.
So, Kate, my last question, whether they are managers or employees or CEOs, what is one piece of advice for leaders in their own domain that they can be doing to, whether it's making the team work better, the company work better, taking new steps? What is the key one or two or even three priorities that you think are really important now? There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of tension still going on. There's a lot of confusion. Do I really need to be doing this? What do you think is important right now that people need to be aware of, the steps that they can take tomorrow?
Yeah, listen. Listen to their people, listen to their customers, listen to their suppliers, listen to the investment community. Don't assume. I mean, every C-suite I walk into, they're doing things because they assume this or they assume that, and it's just it's a waste of money, and I think it's potentially a waste of talent and productivity to not try to go the distance. The other thing I think is you got to let the pedal off the gas sometimes. I don't think the way that we have been operating for a very long time is sustainable in terms of people. We just can't continue doing more with less.
Right.
And people will get burned out and will start to leave and will start to realize that their lives are more important than a job. And so you can't say out of one corner of your mouth you're really concerned about employee mental health and well-being, and out of the other side of your mouth is, these are the goals for the year. Come hell or high water, we're going to hit them.
Right. It's such a great point, particularly during this period of transformation. We will get used to this much change, but there's a lot of change that is behind us. There's a lot more change that's ahead of us. And I think that exacerbates burnout.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And the feelings of instability. Kate, it's been such a joy to speak with you and hear the research, the insights. I promise you, anybody who's listening, there'll be lots of links to Kate's website, her company, and so much incredibly valuable and business case research that proves every single point that she's made. So thank you so much, Kate. It's been such a delight having you on.
And I'm looking forward to reading your book, which is called Empathy Works.
Exactly. That's right. Thank you. Thank you again so much to Kate Lister, President of Global Workplace Analytics. You can follow Kate on LinkedIn and on Twitter @Future Workforce, as well as find out more about her company and discover much valuable research by going to globalworkplaceanalytics.com. This episode was part 2 of a 2-part series with Kate. If you haven't listened to part 1, which talks primarily about the business cases for integrating remote and what arguments Kate has found resonate for different CEOs and companies, I highly recommend you do that now. Immediate action tip. To modernize your workplace and ways of working, listen to your people, listen to your customers and suppliers, listen to the investment community. Don't make assumptions. Also, lift your foot off the gas sometimes or people will get burned out and leave. Thank you for listening. If you would like to understand more about the challenges and opportunities of the new world of business and work, as well as what we are adapting for, why, and the consequences of not proactively moving forward and embracing new work arrangements, I recommend you read or listen to my new book, Empathy Works, The Key to Competitive Advantage in the New Era of Work. Great upcoming episodes will cover topics including artificial intelligence and empathy, ChatGPT, and the challenges of transformation in progress. If you enjoyed this podcast, why not tell a friend, as well as like it? And please write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, curated useful articles, research and information, follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter @ASophieWade. For more information to help navigate this period of transformation, you can also sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter on LinkedIn and my blog, which is available on sophiewade.com and flexcelnetwork.com. Until next time.